For our final Inside Olympia episode of 2023, I sit down for a full-hour in-depth interview with Washington Governor Jay Inslee. His thoughts as he looks back on the year and what he sees ahead in 2024, his last year in office before he steps down after 3 terms as governor.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. It is our last show of the year, and by tradition, we'll spend this hour with Governor Jay Inslee, reviewing the past 12 months and looking ahead to the legislative session that's just around the corner. Governor Inslee, thanks for being here.
Yeah,
good to see
thank you.
Happy almost New Year.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, yeah. So let's dive right in. I want to talk to you, ask you about one of the most pressing issues that this state is facing, and that is the opioid crisis, the fentanyl crisis. I think we have the fastest rising number of deaths in the nation, now averaging about 2,000 a year. You were proposing in your supplemental budget to put more money into prevention and into treating people who are addicted to these drugs, to the tune of $60 million on top of the $200 million in the base budget. The question I have for you is, how many lives do you think this is going to save? What is it going to take to turn the corner and start to reduce the number of deaths?
Well, you know, when it comes to numbers, one is the most important one. Like, every single life is incredible. People are unique. When they're gone, and they can't be replaced. So I'm confident the kind of things we are proposing will save lives over time. I can't give you any estimate of that. But I can tell you we have way too many tragedies of people losing their sons and daughters and sisters and brothers. It's touching so many families, over 1,000 people just in one county here in the last several months. And the fact is, you know, we've always had chemical addiction issues in our society, from alcohol to heroin, and you name it, to meth. But now this fentanyl is like a nuclear weapon. It kills people unexpectedly. They don't see it coming. And one pill means, and they're dead. And so I do believe we need to up our game considerably on this and do the things that we do think do work, and there are things that work, both on the prevention and rehabilitation side. On the rehabilitation side, we need more access to medically assisted treatment, which actually helps people. Sometimes it takes 2-3 times, but people do get off drugs ultimately if they get services. Not always, but if there's a will, there can be a way. We need to make those more accessible to people. We need to increase a really encouraging new way of helping people called Oxford houses. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is where you have a group of people who share an addiction problem, actually run their own home. You'll have 10, 12 people living in a home, and they live it themselves. And this has been really successful in helping people break that addiction cycle. Then there's the immediate treatment. We want to get more Narcan available to people. We want our EMTs to be able to get people, when they're treated with Narcan, which is kind of a miracle drug. You know, you're dying and boom, 5 minutes later you're conscious. But we want to get those people into these medically assisted treatment programs right away, like right there, so they don't fall off 5 days later. And then, of course, the whole prevention issue, to try to make sure our kids understand the lethality of fentanyl.
Do you have any sense, if you're building a more robust treatment system, do you have any sense of where we're at and where we need to go and what that looks like? I've often said, should this be like Starbucks, where there's essentially one on every other corner?
Not going to be Starbucks, not going to be every other corner. But when you're losing 1,000 people in any given year, a significant increase is the best way I could categorize in that. We think $65 million will do a lot for people. And again, we are seeing success. I think one of the things that addiction is really hard. It's really, really tough to break.
People think they are dying when they are trying to get off these drugs.
Now, here's the good news, though. The Suboxone, the other medically assisted treatment I'm talking about, it does help people avoid that problem as they're coming off drugs. And they have been very successful for people. So the good news is these treatment programs can work dramatically for large numbers of people. It's not 100%. And like I say, sometimes it takes 2 and 3 efforts. But the success rate is significant, and that's why this investment is worthy of making.
One more question about this. What is your view on safe consumption sites or overdose supervision sites? The Massachusetts Department of Health is now encouraging that state to look at these. I know they're controversial. They're established in Vancouver, British Columbia. Advocates say they do save lives because there's somebody there watching in case somebody overdoses. Any thought that we should revisit that in this state?
No, I haven't proposed rethinking that. I frankly think the controversy is more than the benefit, really, frankly. I think we need to put our energies to build consensus around increasing treatment, increasing prevention. That's where I think we should put our energies. And that's where we are putting our energies. And I'm hopeful legislature will agree with me on this.
Let's move on to another ongoing and vexing issue, and that is the mental health, behavioral health piece. The state recently paid another $100 million fine for not meeting a court's timeline for getting people who are in jail access to competency evaluation and restoration services at the state hospitals. This issue, as you well know, has been going on for years. The fines have now totaled $400 million. I know your supplemental budget calls for investing another $500 million in behavioral health, and that's on top of the billion in the base budget. But again, along the lines of the drug crisis, what is it going to take and how long is it going to take to kind of get on top of and ahead of this program?
Well, what we propose is a real large bite out of this challenge. And this is a challenge in part because we've been hit with a tsunami of people who need behavioral health. The numbers are astronomical of people who are developing mental health challenges.
And it's children too.
And it's kids too as well, which is heartbreaking to us. So we have just been hit by this giant epidemic of mental challenges right now, and we're trying to respond to that. And as you pointed out, we have made Herculean efforts to do that. We've in the base budget, just under $1 billion. We're proposing another $400 million to address that. But the dollars aren't important. The lives are what's important.
And the numbers don't mean a lot. The dollar amounts don't mean a lot.
Right. What this means, though, is that we want you, when your 15-year-old kid's having an anxiety attack, be able to get mental health treatment now instead of 6 months from now. It means that we want to get those people out of the jails to be able to have competency restoration.
So that means more beds.
It means more beds. It means more beds, and we're doing that as rapidly as humanly possible. There's one message I'd like to leave with you and the public who care about this, and I care a lot about this because these are people who really, really need help. The mental health challenges are really tough on individuals and families. What we did is I basically said, let's build mental health capacity as fast as humanly possible. Get buildings sited as fast as possible. Now, it's a challenge, as you know. Get them staffed as fast as humanly possible. Then we'll figure out how to pay for it. And that's what we're doing. So the dollar we put fits going as fast as we can to help as many people as we possibly can. I can't say that this is going to eliminate all the need for mental health, but it's going to be a big, big step forward. And I can tell you this, we're going as fast as humanly possible.
And if it was 5 years ago maybe that you announced this transformation of mental health in this state, roughly, is it a 10-year process to get there? At what point do you think there won't be a wait to get into the children's hospital?
I can't predict this.
Or into Western State Hospital.
I can't predict this, and I'll tell you why. I can't tell you what the demand's going to be 3 or 4 years from now. Now, if the demand, what it was when I started office, it was that small, we wouldn't have a problem.
That would take care of the problem, perhaps,
we wouldn't have a problem right now. But what has happened is we've had this avalanche of people who need treatment coming into the system. And it takes time to build a mental health hospital. I'm very happy with the Olympic Hospital. We've been able to get it up in just a few months, which is an amazing rapidity of getting this thing built. So we're doing that as fast as we can. I think that the next governor and legislators, they're still going to have work to do after I'm going off to other pursuits. But this is going to be a major step forward.
We're talking about bed capacity and the lack of it, but there's also people who are in the community who are in crisis who are not, under our current law, able to be involuntarily committed. The state of California, Governor Newsom, has signed a series of bills to overhaul his state's mental health system. One of the things that the new laws will do will make it easier to involuntarily commit somebody. Advocates say that that's going to, including the governor there, say it's going to get people the help that they need and deserve. Opponents think that this is a step back in terms of civil liberties. I don't know if you followed what California is doing, but do you think it's something Washington should consider?
Well, I don't.
We see people in crisis in the streets all the time. Not much that can be done.
I'm open to ideas about that. I don't think you're going to see a major debate about this in this session of the legislature. My sense is our bigger problem is just access to services. if you don't have access to services, you don't have a problem with the law that keeps the door shut. The problem is we just need more services. I'm not sure that we have the same problem as California does as to the limited scope of their authority. I really don't know the answer to that. I'm focused on getting more treatment for people. We're going to do that this session. I believe we're going to be in better shape 3 months from now.
Homelessness and housing goes hand in hand with these issues we've been talking about. You recently highlighted the fact that 1,000 people have been moved out of 30 encampments on WashDOT property and right-of-ways since the legislature appropriated money just last year to help pay for transitioning folks. And that's not just to move them, it's to get them into housing.
Right.
You said in your budget, you're asking for another $100 million to continue this work because it's running out. But WashDOT, as I understand it, estimates there are another 2,000 locations that may be being used as encampments. After your announcement about the success, a retired journalist I follow on Facebook wrote, "Celebrate the small victories, yes, the lives bettered and saved, but remember the bigger numbers in the bigger picture. We're losing, and that means we're losing human beings." What's your response to that comment?
Well, first off, I share the view. This is about humans, and I think people forget that sometimes. This is about humans. One of your colleagues the other day said, why should we be spending this money?
Because it's very expensive per person.
It's very expensive per person. This is very expensive work. It's because they're humans. They're somebody's brother, they're somebody's sister, they got a bad break, they get on some chemicals, or maybe they had an injury. They're humans, and that's something that we lose track of on occasion. What I would say is that we're doing a lot with what we have. We've now, and I am pleased, we have removed 30 of the larger encampments around I-5, 405. This is very important, I think, both for the individuals and for the peace of mind of the community, not seeing that squalor all the time. So we have made progress. We've demonstrated our ability to do this, but we're simply out of funds. We need further funds to continue this effort. As you indicated, there's many, many more encampments. We've got some of the larger ones done, but we need to continue that effort. So I'm hoping the legislature will continue this effort. It is expensive for a couple reasons. One, we actually have to build or buy property, right? We're not just renting a room for 30 days. We're actually building or buying property. But that's good because then we have a place that can help lots of people, not just one. People have complained about the cost, but they don't realize when we buy or build an apartment, it's there. We're going to have it for 50, 60, 70 years, which is a good thing. It's going to help more than just one person going into that apartment for 30 or 40 days. And we have to provide supportive services for a lot of these folks. If you don't, they're right back on the street. So if you move somebody with a behavioral health problem and you don't treat it and they go somewhere for 30 days and then they decompensate and they're right back on the streets.
You're paying for wraparound services
in addition to the bed. We're paying for the services in the least expensive way, because if you don't do it you pay for it in the emergency department, which is really expensive, or in the jails, which is really expensive. We're doing with it where it's most efficient, which is to get people supportive services in shelter or housing. And we simply got to continue this work. Now, if I may, just for a moment, the solution to this is pretty obvious. We need more housing.
Well,
we need to build.
You're leading to my next
question.
question.
We do not have enough roofs in the state of Washington. And mental health is important, chemical addiction is important, but fundamentally we got to build more housing in this state, and we're doing a lot of that.
Well, let's talk about that. So Washington, we know, has one of the highest percentages of people experiencing homelessness among states. We now have a growing eviction crisis because the federal money has run out. Your Department of Commerce estimates the state will need another, and this number always just staggers me, another 1.1 million housing units over the next 20 years. A couple of examples of what other states are doing. New York Democrats have introduced faith-based housing to make it easier for faith-based groups to build. Utah's governor has proposed an ambitious plan to build 35,000 new starter homes by 2028. That's in 3 years. What will it take, 4 years, 4 years, do the math correct. What will it take from your perspective, and I know this state is putting a lot of money into this, but what will it take to turn the corner on housing so that more people are falling into housing rather than out of it?
We got to build more housing. And
but how do we do that?
We finance, but a lot of it is public financing, because the private capital markets simply will not build housing. They can't do it cost effectively for people in lower income groups. So if we're either going to have massive homelessness or the public is going to help finance some of this. Now, we made a big step forward with just under $1 billion last year in the underlying budget. As you know, I'd asked for $4 billion. I wanted to pursue a larger bite out of this. We are going to do more this year in the supplemental budget. I'm hopeful in that regard. But we're going to have to continue public investment to build housing, or we're going to have chronic homelessness. The economy simply is not producing wages that can support people with the high housing costs that we have today. So we have to continue to make these investments. But we're doing it. By the way,
But the state's not going to build 1.1 million units.
no, but that doesn't. No, we're not proposing that. But a portion of those will have to be publicly financed because the economy can't support it for wages adequately otherwise.
How will we get the rest of it, though? I mean, will the state do a quarter, an eighth?
No, the
third?
private markets will. People will buy. The private contractors will do private buildings, and private people will buy private homes.
But don't we need to incentivize that level of building somehow?
No, I guess I would more say we should enable it, and by enabling it, we need to do things to open up more places to build. So as you know, we passed a law last year to increase the ability to build houses in cities.
In dense areas.
In dense
Near
areas.
transit.
I'm hopeful that we will continue this year to pass a bill that will allow denser housing near transit stops and the like. We've also passed a bill to improve the permitting. Time is money when you're building. Right. And we passed a bill to accelerate the permitting process for cities. That's a big deal.
When the private home builders say you are driving up the cost to build a house by imposing additional environmental requirements on new construction, what do you say in response?
A couple things. One, you find out actually it's cheaper frequently to have energy efficiency in your home. You may have a few more dollars up front, but over the life of the home, you save bodacious amounts of money in your utility bills. So I'll give you an example. I was over in Wenatchee the other day, met a woman who's a senior woman. We helped her get new insulation for her home. Her utility costs some money to do that, right? But her utility bills went from $200 a month to $50 a month. Went to Toppenish the other day and saw a woman who was picking apples that morning when I saw her. We helped her get solar panels for a roof. She's got a zero utility bill now.
Well, is that an argument for more subsidies and rebates so that people can both add that to their existing homes, but if you're building the home, you can get money off because you've put in the heat pump, you've put in the extra installation, you've put in the triple pane
Well,
windows.
you're getting a break on your utility bills already. That's an incentive. You have a lesser, you get a
But
lesser.
the upfront cost can be such a barrier. The cost that you're paying, what your mortgage is going to be, that's what people, or your rent.
Things are worth paying for that save you money over the long run. If you have a car that gets good gas mileage, even if it costs a little bit more, that's a good deal if you over the lifespan of your car. Many, if not most of these investments pay themselves back in 3, 4, 5 years. So yes, there are some capital costs involved in this, in developing an energy efficient system, but you get big paybacks when it comes to a monthly utility bill.
One more question about the homelessness problem. Do you think there's enough accountability now in how dollars spent to solve that problem are being spent?
Well, I know that's a chronic concern. People would like to do this for free, and it's not. It's very, very expensive.
Well, they certainly want to know their dollars are going
right
to strike at the heart of the problem.
What I can say is we would like to provide as much transparency as possible.
Would you like to see more auditing, more mechanisms to sort of show?
I don't have the sense. I think of what we're financing in the state. I don't have a sense that that's going to reveal some place that money's going to a secret bank account in Switzerland. We are spending.
But is it being effective? I think that's the question people have. Is it actually getting the job done? Is it getting people off the street?
So if you get in a car with me today and you drive to Seattle, I'll show you.
It'll take us a couple hours.
We'll go at night.
Okay.
So, I'll show you 10. When you say, is it effective? Yeah. Take a look. There are 10 encampments that were on that route that aren't there anymore. Yeah. Those people have shelter. They're not out into the rain. 80% of them are still in shelter. It is effective. Yeah. We monitor its effectiveness, and it has been effective. In addition, we're making investments so they don't come back. You'll see a bunch of rocks and fencing and the like so they don't come back. So yes, things are changing. I think the concern people have is that these are large numbers, and so they immediately think, why can't it be cheaper? And the reason it can't be cheaper is if you really want to solve the problem, it takes some investment. If you really want to get somebody out of the street so they're not living in your corner, I had a relative there who was pretty upset about somebody living like right in front of his house. If you really want that person not to be in front of your house, you got to make some investments in their mental health challenges, in their chemical addiction challenges so they don't just come back. That takes money, and I think it is effective, and we're spending it in ways that is being productive. This, what I was telling you about the effectiveness, we monitor this. So about 80% of the people who we get out of these camps still, months later are still in shelter or have not gone back to homelessness. It's been, I think that's a pretty good effectiveness.
I want to shift gears and ask you about the Climate Commitment Act, which is a key pillar of your climate agenda. And it now looks like opponents have collected enough signatures, or maybe close to collecting enough signatures, to qualify an initiative to the legislature to repeal this program. Mm-hmm. First question is, what should the legislature do, in your mind, if this lands in their lap? And they have three choices, right? They can pass it, which seems unlikely. They could just let it go to voters, or they could pass an alternative, and then both the repeal measure and the alternative would go to voters in November. What do you think they should do? Well,
we'll see if this qualifies. We don't know the answer to that yet. But what I do know is that we should preserve our ability to preserve the ability of our kids to breathe. That I know for sure. Our kids are exposed to diesel smoke and all kinds of industrial pollution right now. And our state has been wise enough and aggressive enough and smart enough to pass measures to protect our children from air pollution. And we should continue that protection of our kids. We have an epidemic of asthma because of smoke just from the pollution. Our kids couldn't go out and play a few summers because of the smoke from these wildfires. Our salmon are dying because the water's too hot, literally too hot. It just kills the salmon. We should not go backwards and strip this protection of our children in protecting our quality of our air and our water and our forests and our farms. No, we should continue to protect that which we hold most dear, which is our kids and our beautiful state. So number one, we should maintain this limitation on pollution. That's absolutely fundamental. Now the question is, what should we do with the resources that have been generated? What are the best investments to use dollars generated by that project to help Washingtonians? A lot of ideas on that. I've proposed quite a number of them. I know things are working right now. We've got 8 million rides by our kids already for free, zero cost to families, that we're helping our families by eliminating that bus fare for 8 million rides. We need to continue that. We should not eliminate that.
So is this a little bit of a preview of how you would be making the case for voters to not repeal it if it ends up on the ballot? Do you think that you can save this if it ends up on the ballot?
Yes, I do.
There are some people who are clearly not happy about it and feel like the reason they're paying more for gas is at least in part due to this.
We should not go backwards, and I don't believe Washingtonians, for the first time in our history, to go backwards on protecting our clean air and clean water. I believe Washingtonians value the health of our children. They understand that we can't allow these oil companies to be putting pollution in unlimited amounts. The folks who want to repeal this law, you know what they want? They want to have unlimited pollution. They want to have zero protection for the air quality for our children. That's just not right and not acceptable. So no, we should not repeal this law.
Would it be strategic to send an alternative out to voters, do you think, or would that be a bad idea?
Don't know. Until this is qualified, that remains to be seen. So I don't know the answer to that. I do want to point out, though, there are so many things that we are doing, or I have proposed to do, with these dollars to help families.
Right. So far, these auctions have raised, as of this is our conversation, about $2 billion. And that is money you get to put back into.
And let me point out the first thing. We're putting that money, we're not putting it in Houston, Texas. Because if we don't do this, the profits just go to Houston, Texas. We want this money to be staying in the state of Washington. We want to help people get heat pumps. We want their kids to have electric buses so they don't have to breathe diesel. We want schools to have filtration systems so you can filter the air and our kids aren't breathing that pollution. We want free bus rides. We want additional bike lanes. We want electric charging station for those who do decide to get an electric car. All of those things help Washingtonians rather than oil companies in Houston, Texas. And that's investments that are worth making. So we'll be talking about that. I know there'll be a lot of ideas on the best way to do it. We also want to give about a $200 credit to 2 million Washingtonians on their utility bill. We know times are tough, so we wanted to demonstrate, in addition to the earned income tax credit, which we did last year, in addition, on top of that, we want to give a utility credit for about 2 million people.
Why not a car tab rebate to ease the extra pain at the pump?
Well, we could do that, but then
you're not proposing that, though, right?
I'm not proposing it. Bill Gates doesn't really need that right now. We want to focus our help to those who are most need in today's economy. That's why we proposed this $2 million assistance for the utilities. Also the earned income tax credit, which is $700 to about, I don't know, 15, 20% of the population. So we've wanted to target that assistance to the people that really are the most in need of that assistance. And every time we don't do that, we have fewer heat pumps to get to people, fewer bus rides for free bus rides for kids, fewer filtration systems for our schools. So it's just a trade-off that we're making.
Do you want to make changes to this program, tweaks? I know that there's talk of linking up with California and Quebec. That will take some time, but do you think the time horizons, who's affected, anything to try to bring down the cost of these credits?
Yes, we do think, thanks for bringing that up. So we would like to reduce the cost, the compliance costs, and we think we can do that by linking our markets. I know this sounds like jargon, but it's important. Basically, if we have a larger market for these carbon credits with California and Quebec, we believe that can moderate the cost of the program to the industry. And so we want to pursue that. It's a smart thing to do. We want efficiencies in the market, and I think we can acquire that by linking with California.
A last question about this. The Seattle Times editorial board recently wrote that opponents of this system, and I'm quoting here from the editorial, lampooned a 2022 quote from you that cap and trade in the state would result in gas price increases in pennies. The increase was likely closer to $1 to $2 per gallon. Oil companies passed along the program's new cost to consumers. Do you have any regrets when you were selling this program about saying it would be pennies on the gallon?
Well, what we did is that our department made a good faith assessment of what we predicted the auction costs would be. But like any auction, there's no perfect predictions. You and I can't tell anybody what the Dow Jones is going to be even tomorrow, much less 6 months from now. So the costs have been higher than the Department of Ecology predicted. I conveyed those predictions and those assessments to the public, and that was my job, and that's what I did. Those costs have been higher. Like I said, we want to link with California and Quebec to try to reduce those prices. But there is some upside. A lot of people are going to get help with their utility bills as a result of this, and help for clean energy in a lot of different ways as a result of that fact. And we're getting people clean air. So I don't believe we want to go backwards on this.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we continue our in-depth end-of-year interview with Governor Jay Inslee. Back right after this.
It will dwarf Katrina. It'll be absolutely the largest thing that we will have had to have dealt with in our country. We know the clock is ticking.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. Joining me once again is Governor Jay Inslee. I want to just ask you briefly about both the cap and trade repeal effort and then some other efforts that might end up on the ballot. Just a data point. Voters have twice rejected cap and trade type programs before. What makes you think if this were to end up on the ballot, it would survive? Have times changed? Is there something that makes you think it could 3 times would be the charm, so to speak?
Well, I think a couple of big things have changed, actually, since those cases. One, people are now experiencing climate change. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, this was a hypothetical issue, right? It was Al Gore and a few graphs that suggested CO2 is going up on the graph, so we should be worried. This is a very different situation now. Now your kids can't go out and play because of smoke from the forest fires. Now we had Medical Lake burned down and Malden burned down. Now we have floods of unprecedented dimension. The floods we're having are just incredible. The rain events we're having are incredible. The heat we're experiencing, the heat dome we had, was it last summer or 2 summers ago? I've forgotten now.
Yeah.
Well, we're dramatic. Well, shoot, now I got to have air conditioning in Seattle. This is a new thing in my life. So people now are experiencing this, the front edge of climate change, which has been hypothetical up till now. That has dramatically changed people's perception about how bad this problem is. That's number one. Number two, and this is equally important, we now have technologies that allow us to solve this problem at reasonable cost that's very accessible. Electric cars were not a common thing 6, 7, 8 years ago. Heat pumps were not seen as a necessity or even available in some sense in that period of time. Electric school buses hadn't been invented yet. So we're now seeing all of these technologies coming on that allow us to transition to clean energy. So we both recognize in our own lives it's changing my life. Look, when it changes my life, when my neighbors underwater like they were, right, the people who lived below me on the waterfront, They had water in their floorboards. Climate change is real to them now because of the rising sea levels, the flooding. So I think those things have changed fairly dramatically, the situation. And we've also demonstrated that this works. We are limiting pollution. We are generating funds to help Washingtonians. And this is what we do in the state of Washington.
The same conservative activists who are behind this repeal effort have several other initiatives they're trying to qualify to the legislature, including one in police pursuits to kind of loosen up the rules around that, one to give people a chance to opt out of the new state-run long-term care insurance program, which just got set up, a repeal of the capital gains tax, a prohibition on income taxes, and a parental rights measure. How concerned are you if some or all of those end up on the ballot that voters will, in essence, undo years of Democratic Party policy priorities?
We have been going forward since I've been in public life. I started in the legislature in 1989, and we've continually gone forward for more freedoms, freedom for women and freedom of choice, freedom to marry who you want to marry, freedom to have a fair tax system so that the working people don't have an undue tax burden and the rich pay their fair share in their capital gains, under recognition to live your life as you want to have the freedom of breathing and have your kids breathe so that pollution doesn't damage their lungs. Those are all freedoms that we have advanced in the last several decades, and I'm confident we will continue to advance those because it's central to the heart of the state of Washington.
Do you think Democrats have misread the electorate on any of these issues?
I don't know. I've been elected 3 times. Maybe it was accidental each time, but no, I don't believe that's true. And we have made major challenges every year since I've been governor, and we've increased our majorities every year. People have voted for the people who have supported the policies that I have adopted. Paid family leave, highest minimum wage, best financial aid program for our students, a long-term care program, huge improvements in investments in transportation, good pollution laws to have clean air quality, being free to marry who are, protection of women's right of choice. People have time after time voted for the folks since I've been in this office that support those policies, and I think there's a reason. I think they're consistent with the majority of Washingtonians' beliefs. And we're not going back with the Donald Trump MAGA divisiveness and hate-filled rejection of democracy. Our state is not going to go in that direction.
Given that there are people who are feeling the pain of inflation and rising costs, and that there are government programs now that are costing them more, the long-term care program would be an example. What would you say to somebody who's feeling like their buying power is going less far and state policies are costing them more, whether that's at the pump, a paycheck deduction here and there, and are feeling like this isn't working for them?
Well, look, I think clean air is working for people. Your kids can breathe. I think that's an important thing. The long-term care proposal is, we're all temporarily abled, right? I'm temporarily able. There's a disabled and then guys like me who are temporarily abled, who hopes to age gracefully. This is something that's very important for people who want to live in dignity. And people sometimes value that a lot more once they get that benefit. The same arguments were made against Social Security, okay? The same arguments were made against Medicare. And now we hear those same arguments against having a provision to help people age gracefully and with dignity, hopefully in their own homes, which is a big deal. And, I think we should value some of the last years of our lives to live in dignity, and this will allow people to do that. So it's a worthwhile investment, just like Social Security and Medicare.
Okay, I want to shift gears. A few years ago, the Department of Social and Health Services cleaved off children's services, and we created a new agency, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and it's been in the news a lot lately. We've had multiple escapes from the Glen facility, King 5 News.
Partial escapes, attempted escapes.
Well, yeah, they got away, they got back, then they were captured, but they've been notable, and I think staff have been assaulted. And then there was this King 5 report about contraband found at the Green Hills School south of Olympia. There was a raid, a search warrant executed on that facility, and they found this contraband. What I want to ask you about is local authorities, local officials there said they wrote you to alert you to the concerns about this and say that they didn't hear back, and then they executed a search warrant. Well, what happened there?
Well, what actually happened is I think the officers called Green Hill There was some miscommunication involved in that I wish they'd called twice instead of just once. And then they issued a search warrant that I'm not sure was exactly necessary. If they'd made one more call to somebody higher in the chain, I'm pretty confident it would have got resolved. They went and they found some drugs where it should have been, which is the evidence locker. Now,
But why
it
wasn't
wasn't
that
handled.
being turned over
I'm sorry?
Why wasn't that evidence being turned over, and why weren't cases being referred to the local authorities?
Well, they have been actually, not in every case, not instantaneously, but they had an evidence locker, like police officers have. You have an evidence locker. It's not being handed out to the children in the center. So I think this was a case of some miscommunication. I think it could have been handled better, and I think that we have protocols in place to resolve that kind of miscommunication. We have now made, I think, necessary investments that we're still doing in improving the security at some of these juvenile facilities. So as you know, we had an appropriation last year to build a fence. Echo Glen, this juvenile facility where these 3 folks ran out and they got to the swamp. They didn't get very far in the swamp. But that facility has never had a fence around it. Well, we now are having, unfortunately, juveniles with a lot more violent behavior than we used to have. Society is changing. We have some older people now in that system, and we have to have an increased security in that facility. So we are building a fence as fast as we can. We're also adding additional security personnel, so there's additional security people outside some of these facilities. And we've increased the staffing as well to try to deal with this. So this has required additional work, and we're still not finished it. So it's required more work. It's getting it.
The Interstate Bridge Replacement Project, you just visited that site over the Columbia River. Washington and Oregon have both pledged $1 billion each. Have you spoken yet with the U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg? How confident are you that that project is going to get the $2.5 billion in federal transportation dollars, infrastructure dollars, to help get this fully funded?
Well, I had a good conversation with Secretary Buttigieg. Was it last week, week before last? He's well aware of the project. He understands our arguments that this is a national asset. The I-5 corridor is a national security asset as well. He understands that it's imperative, and it's also consistent. A point I made with him is really consistent with President Biden's order to the federal government to really fight climate change, because we can get multimodal on there, will reduce pollution of people driving over that bridge. So
Just
that's
to be
really
clear,
important
multimodal, is that light rail or is that bus rapid transit or both?
It hasn't yet been determined, but I'm confident that we're going to have consensus about having a multimodal component on that bridge. I'm very confident of that. We now have unanimity across the water about that. So I feel good about that. I also talked to Mitch Landrieu about it, who's handling the infrastructure dollars.
Yep.
So I feel good. You can't have any guarantees, but I think we're in a good position. That needs to be done. This bridge was built when Woodrow Wilson was the president, and a small tremor could be a problem there. So this is high priority. I feel pretty good about it.
What is your view?
And I'm still angry at the Republican Party for losing $1 billion of federal money that could have built that bridge. That bridge might have been there by now, except for a Republican chowderhead down there named Don Benton, who took away that money. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen in American politics, and they should be ashamed.
You're referring to 10 years ago or some
Yes.
number of years ago.
And I
there
haven't
was an
gotten over it,
You haven't
because
apparently you haven't.
this bridge should have been built by now. And you know what? Their attitude was, well, we just don't want those people from Oregon coming over here. Well, guess who? We live in an international economy, and they thought Oregon was a foreign country or something. It was just ridiculous.
Is there any silver lining in the delay in terms of the fact that the two states are now cooperating in a way that they did not before, in the sense that you say that there is now agreement on both sides
No,
about multimodal?
there was no silver lining. The Republicans cost us $1 billion, and we lost a decade because of the hard-headedness of one or two legislators down there. It was the most asinine thing I've ever seen in Washington State political history, and I'm not getting over it. How's that for an answer?
That is about the most strident I have seen you in some time, I have to say. And we won't relitigate that, but you're on the record now. We know your position. And Don Benton is not here to defend himself, but...
There is no defense. If there was, I would announce it.
Okay, so there are, just briefly on this, there are three options for replacing these twin spans. They are all bridges. There is a contingent that believes a tunnel option should be considered. Why is that not on the table, especially given that there are concerns about accommodating river traffic?
Well, this has been the most studied corridor in American history, and it just has never been penciled out for 25 different reasons. And I do believe that this is the most viable consensus approach that we have available, and we can't be arguing about it for another 3 decades. We got to get this job going.
Did you get any assurance from Pete Buttigieg about this money, federal money?
I get the assurance that he would be very, very personally attentive to it, and he is. He understands it. He's been out here. He gets it. But there's other competing projects across the state of Washington or the United States that, of course, he's attentive to as well. But I think we're going to head in the right direction on this bridge.
So bigger picture, rising transportation costs. I mean, there's all this federal infrastructure money that's going to states. At the same time, prices are going up, costs are going up. Seattle Times recently reported that the cost for the new 520 bridge over Portage Bay will be at least $1.3 billion. The original cost estimate was $800 million. Other projects have gone up by 25 to 40%. How much does inflation threaten the planned $17 billion 16-year transportation package that the state's just embarking upon?
Well, every percentage of that inflation in the construction costs is 1 percentage point threat, if you will. And there will be, in the future budgets, legislators are going to have to wrestle with this. We have proposed some modest transportation improvements within existing revenues, but there will be, at a later date, have to be some reckoning. Legislators will have to deal with this.
Do you think it imperils projects at this point? Are you going to have to get back in there, or is the lawmakers going to have to rework this package?
We're not proposing restacking the deck this session. It's a short session. I don't think the legislature is capable of doing that this year, but as I've indicated, in future years, they will have to do that.
I should note, if the cap and trade were to go on the ballot and if it were to get rejected, that would have implications for that package as well.
It's a $900 million loss, and about half of that goes to transportation. So yes, that would be a real problem for the transportation budget.
The Seattle Times also recently reported that it could cost up to $4 billion more to comply with a court order to improve salmon passages under state highways. The newspaper called it an eye-watering sum that doubles the amount of current estimates. How's the state going to dig out from this?
Well, I've proposed another $150 million this supplemental budget to increase on top of the $2 or $3 billion we've already put into culverts. So we're moving the needle, and I'm really happy to see these. Driving down.
Well, the big ones have been done. It's now the smaller ones.
Now the
that are
smaller
cost
ones,
a lot, and you've got a 2030 deadline.
And that's why I'm glad we're putting $150 million in it.
But they're saying it's going to cost $4 billion more.
I'm not going to solve all of Washington's problems.
Is there anything to do about this, or is this just a case of you got to pay up because the judge said so?
As I said, the future governors will continue to deal with this. I don't want to solve all of Washington's problems while I'm governor. This will remain. But by the way, you've talked about a litany of challenges. We still got a great state here. I don't know if you've noticed this. People seem to want to live here. It's really shocking, but they really like it here. It's a shock listening to our discussion that there's some good things happening in the state of Washington, like the best financial aid package in the United States, like the best paid family leave, like massive increases in educational funding. Just wanted to point those things out.
Okay, so you've given me an entree here then, because Republicans put out some data points that they think are not as flattering to the state. So let me ask you to respond to these. They say that state spending over the last decade has far outpaced wage growth. They note that the price of gas when you came into office was $3.30 a gallon. Today it's $4.20 a gallon, 94 cents above the national average. They say our tax burden is higher, our housing affordability and rents have gotten worse. The rate of violent crime is at a 25-year high, and they end with K-12 student test scores in math and English are on the decline compared to other states. The Republicans say things are going in the wrong direction.
Well, if Don Benton had been governor, I'm sure all of these problems would have been resolved. And if it's such a terrible place, why have 1 million people moved here while I've been governor? This is a great place to live, and we've made it a better place in the last 10 years in a variety of ways. And I just mentioned a number of those. And by the way, when you come out of these gas prices, we have always been in the top 2 or 3 in the gas prices because we have kind of a stranded production capacity in the Northwest. This is not new for us. It has always been the case. And I'm very happy that they have come down 70 cents in the last 6 or 7 weeks while these folks have been criticizing me for it. We are whipsawed by these oil and gas companies, and it's just wrong that they should be able to put pollution in the air and stick us with both the pollution and these costs. It's one of the reasons we will be introducing a bill this year to bring transparency to this, so we can get to the bottom of this to see if we're being gouged and do something about it if we are. So yes, it's not the Garden of Eden yet, but I'm proud of what we've done in the last 10 years, and I doubt that the Republicans would have made this a happier place by taking away a woman's right of choice, which they wake up every single morning trying to do.
Do you think
By
Washington
reducing,
Republicans
I'm not,
do?
just let me finish. By reducing the protections of our air quality, by making it a more regressive system so that working people have to pay a higher percentage, by stripping the protection of early childhood education, by removing the paid family leave, all of which they would do if they were in charge of this state. That's why they're not in charge of this state, because they're not in touch with the true values of this state. And they continue to march down the Donald Trump road. They continue to follow him. They continue to nominate candidates that are for Donald Trump. And that's why the Democrats have been in the majority party in the governor's race for 40 years now. And I hope that it will continue.
One of the things you mentioned in your favor was investments in education, and you are proposing increases in paraeducator pay. You're also proposing that the state pick up more of the cost of covering special education. The president of the WEA, the teachers union, said that while these are promising investments in your supplemental budget, the percentage of the state's budget devoted to education continues to decline, leaving students statewide without the supports they need. He writes, the inadequate funding for the system as a whole is forcing school closures, budget and staffing cuts, and inadequate investment for our students. As one of the wealthiest states in the nation, we need to do far more to support our children and help them build a bright future. What is your response to that comment from the WEA president?
Well, what I can say is that while I've been governor, we have made the largest investments in education in the history of the state of Washington by billions of dollars. So it's very difficult to swallow saying that we're not improving funding for education. This year we're doing several $100 million for education, including the paraeducation improvement. We had one of the largest teacher pay increases in America in the last decade, a year or two ago, and we solved the McCleary issue, which was billions of dollars of issues. So we have been dramatically increasing resources. What is happening is we have declining enrollment in some of these districts, and our enrollment goes, our compensation from the state goes to the number of students you have. And when you have less students, you get less money for the state. I don't think that that's a terrible way to run a railroad. And we've had declining enrollment in some of these districts. Now, that does present some challenges for them if you have declining revenues and you still have some existing infrastructure costs. I understand that. But I can't solve the problem of either people are having less children or they're not going to public school. So that's the situation that we're in. This issue about percentage of the revenues, I really think is a red herring. Look, if you have less children in your school district, it's not relative to other parts of your population. It's not a surprise that as a percentage of the budget, it may go down over time. And
But it is the paramount duty, and a lot of people have said
and we have less kids. If you're going to have less kids, and if you have more people who have mental health challenges, which we have, if you have more people that are becoming homeless, which we have, if you have more people that have chemical addiction problems that need to be treated, which we have, those things need to be seen to by the state government as well. So I just don't think we have a situation where we should ignore all of those other state responsibilities.
I want to ask you about...
But I always respect union members who argue for their members, so
Okay.
that's good.
Well, since I'm so successful here in getting your ire up a little bit, let me ask you, I'll give you one more criticism. The headline in the recent Seattle Times editorial read, "Washington's ferry system is broken and Governor Inslee must right the ship." Noted that ferries are breaking down. You are a ferry rider. Your home is on Bainbridge, so this is near and dear to you. Ferries have been breaking down. Service has been interrupted. It's taking a while to build new ferries. Quoting from the editorial, "The state of the ferries makes two things clear. First, state lawmakers in Inslee with over a decade in office did not make the necessary investments to maintain a robust fleet. Second, they only belatedly found the political courage to allow boat builders from across the country to compete for the state's business, and as opposed to just build in Washington only. Earlier action could have bought more vessels for less." As I said, you're a Bainbridge Island resident, you're a ferry rider, and you're the governor of the state of Washington. How do you respond to this criticism?
Well, I think, in a sense, it's true, right? So if, I've helped pass the two largest transportation budgets in the history of the state. That's been really good for transportation. And had they been larger, had the legislature appropriated more money, we could have built more boats earlier. But I'm not in charge of the whole state government. The legislature gets to write a budget as well. I have been a fierce advocate for ferry funding the whole time that I have been in there, but I don't get to write the whole budget by myself. I do think that it's possible, had there been more capital investment earlier, we could have accelerated that. But I can tell you what we're doing right now, which is to build boats as fast as humanly possible. And one of the things we've done is I've had the Department of Transportation open up the bidding to multiple yards doing multiple boats in the same year, so we can hopefully accelerate getting some of the new boats that we need.
Should we allow international competition for these bids? I know
We
BC
can't-
Ferries has done that.
Yeah, we can't under federal law. So the federal law and the Jones Acts prohibits us from having international competition. But we are opening it up to domestic yards. And again, I want to see if we can do this faster. We've also, in my budget this year, increased our investments in getting more crew, because we've had crew shortages as well, which has really bedeviled us. So we have a new AB to mate program. We're doubling the number of people we're bringing in from out of state. We have a new kind of scholarship program to get them in the mate program. So we're doing a lot we can to accelerate the staffing as well. And I'm acutely aware of this. I'm a ferry rider. I know how important they are to the state of Washington.
And you've no doubt experienced the disruptions too. Let's jump to international news and what's going on in the Middle East. And I want to ask you, in this context, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who's a Democrat, sent a letter to her state university and college presidents recently threatening aggressive enforcement action against campuses that fail to swiftly discipline anyone who calls for the genocide of any group. She said calls for genocide on college campuses violate New York's human rights law. I'm wondering if you have sent a similar message or considering sending a similar message to public university and college presidents here in Washington.
Well, obviously, I don't accept genocide for any group, obviously. I haven't found a need to write letters to people about this and don't need to generate headlines about it. And I hope that we can find a way to be civil and respectful in these very passionate discussions.
Is there
and it's a challenge. Look, the passions on this are very high for obvious reasons. It's a challenge, and I just hope everybody is as civil as humanly possible.
What would you say about this conflict?
I would say that calling for genocide of any group is totally unacceptable in any discourse. And I understand free speech, but there's a lot of ways you can express your position without calling for genocide of any group.
And the calls for a ceasefire?
I have not made any particular direction to the president. He hasn't asked for my advice. It's a very difficult issue. I am hopeful that the IDF can be as discreet as possible in not causing civilian casualties. It is my hope that that situation improves so that we can get more humanitarian aid to the civilian innocent folks, and there are such folks in the Gaza Strip. I am hopeful that the IDF will improve their ability to do that. I think the president has expressed that to Israel fairly strongly, and I hope that that is received well.
We have less than 2 minutes left. I want to ask you about the 2024 elections.
By the way, I don't want to go out saying, but I do believe Israel has the right to defense in this situation. I recognize the horror that Israel has experienced. We understand the horror in this case.
The 2024 election polling shows a rematch between Biden and Trump would be very tight. How concerned are you about Biden's low numbers and polls that show that voters think he's too old to serve a second term?
Well, I'm going to the Rolling Stones here in May, and he's the same age as Mick Jagger jumping around on the stage, so it's not bothersome to me. I've been working with him, and I can tell you he's sharp. He is with it. He gets it. And he gets it a heck of a lot more than Donald Trump will ever get it. So I'm confident in his ability to be president of the United States. And I think he's done a good job. He's done some remarkable things internationally, rallying the country to Ukraine or the nations of the world that is now threatened by the Republican Party, who now all of a sudden wants to go weak-kneed in the defense of Ukraine. That's very disturbing to me. His work on tackling climate change has been stellar, which I really, really appreciate. And he's brought kind of a civil tone to our discourse so that we can have a little more unity and a little less divisiveness. And I don't think we need the divisiveness of the ex-president who lost the last election but somehow can't count votes.
Okay. We're going to leave it there. This is, of course, your last year of your last term. Big decision was made this year. I hope we'll get an opportunity for an exit interview a year from now to reflect on 12 years in office. But thank you for this opportunity. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.
Good to see you.
Go
Thank
Dogs.
Thanks for watching Inside Olympia. This is our last show for 2023. We hope you have a good and safe holiday season. Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2024.